I never imagined that a single word could destroy my relationship with my family. That word was no. The funny thing is that I wasn't even saying no to anything unreasonable. I wasn't refusing to help during an emergency. I wasn't abandoning anyone. I wasn't asking for repayment. I was simply refusing to hand over another $40,000 to my younger sister. Yet somehow that one decision turned me from the family's favorite son into the family's biggest villain overnight. And honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because losing my family forced me to discover something I should have learned years earlier. They never loved me. They loved what I provided. My name is Ethan. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the successful one, the one everyone called whenever they needed money, favors, connections, transportation, or emotional support. My younger sister, Madison, was the exact opposite. She was 31 years old and somehow still living life like a teenager. She bounced between jobs every few months, made terrible financial decisions, started business ventures that failed almost immediately, dated men who treated her badly, ignored advice, created problems, then expected everyone else to fix them, mostly me. The problem wasn't Madison. The problem was my parents. They had spent her entire life protecting her from consequences. If Madison overdrew her bank account, my parents called me. If Madison couldn't pay rent, my parents called me. If Madison wanted a new car, my parents called me. If Madison got herself into another crisis, somehow it became my responsibility to solve. At first, I didn't mind helping. She was my little sister. Family helps family. At least that's what I believed. What I didn't realize was that helping someone occasionally and becoming their permanent financial safety net are completely different things. Over the years, the requests became larger. $1,000 here, $5,000 there, $10,000 for a failed online business, $7,000 for credit card debt, $15,000 after she wrecked her car, $20,000 after another failed venture. I stopped keeping track after a while. Every time I tried discussing repayment, my parents would guilt-trip me. She's your sister. Family should support each other. You're doing so much better financially than she is. Don't be selfish. That word always amazed me. Selfish. Apparently giving away enormous amounts of money wasn't generosity. It was simply expected. But wanting to keep my own money? That was selfish. The more successful I became, the more entitled my family became. I worked hard for everything I had. I graduated college while working nights, built a career in software development, spent years climbing the ladder, saved aggressively, invested carefully, worked weekends, skipped vacations, made sacrifices. Yet somehow my family talked about my success like it was pure luck, like money simply appeared in my bank account through magic. They never saw the years of stress behind it, the 80-hour work weeks, the missed birthdays, the sleepless nights, the anxiety. They only saw the result. And in their minds, the result belonged to everyone, especially Madison. The breaking point arrived 3 years ago. I was having dinner with my parents when Madison arrived late. She looked unusually excited. That should have been my first warning sign. Whenever Madison looked excited, it usually meant she had discovered a new way to spend someone else's money. Halfway through dinner, she announced that she was launching a luxury clothing boutique. My father immediately looked impressed. My mother started praising her entrepreneurial spirit. I asked the obvious question. How are you funding it? Madison smiled, the smile of someone who already assumed the answer. That's actually why we're having this family dinner. I remember feeling my stomach drop, because I knew exactly what was coming next. What I didn't know was that this request would finally expose who my family truly was. And once the truth came out, there would be no going back. The family that spent 15 years using me was about to discover something shocking. The person they considered their personal ATM was finally closing the account, and none of them were prepared for what happened next. Madison waited until everyone had finished eating before she revealed the details of her amazing opportunity. Looking back, I think she already believed the money was hers. The confidence in her voice wasn't the confidence of someone making a request. It was the confidence of someone collecting a debt. A luxury boutique just became available downtown, she said, practically bouncing in her chair. The owner is retiring and she's willing to sell everything for way below market value. My mother gasped dramatically. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I know, Madison said. Then she turned toward me, and there it was, the look. The same look I had seen dozens of times over the years. The look that always came right before I opened my wallet. I only need $40,000 to secure it. Only $40,000. As casually as someone asking to borrow a pen, I stared at her. 40,000? It's actually a really good deal. A good deal for who? For me. Of course, my father immediately jumped in. Son, opportunities like this don't come around often. I nearly laughed. Opportunities. That word was always reserved for Madison. When I worked 80-hour weeks, it wasn't an opportunity. When I skipped vacations to save money, it wasn't an opportunity. When I spent years building my career, nobody called that an opportunity. But whenever Madison wanted someone else's money, suddenly everyone became an investment expert. I set down my fork. How much are you contributing? Madison blinked. What? Your own money. The table went quiet as if I had asked something offensive. I don't have $40,000. I know. That's why I'm asking for your help. There it was. Not a business plan, not a loan proposal, not an investment pitch, just another expectation. I looked around the table. My parents already seemed convinced. Nobody had asked about revenue projections. Nobody had asked about inventory. Nobody had asked why a woman who had failed every previous business suddenly deserved another $40,000, because none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was whether I would pay. Again. I took a deep breath. Then I said the word that changed everything. No. The silence that followed felt unreal. Madison stared at me. My mother looked shocked. My father frowned. What do you mean no? Madison asked. I mean no. She laughed nervously like I was joking. I thought you were serious. I am serious. The smile vanished from her face. What happened to supporting family? I've supported family for 15 years. My father immediately leaned forward. That's not fair. Really? Your sister needs help. She always needs help. Nobody liked that answer, especially because it was true. Madison crossed her arms. I can't believe you're acting like this. I almost choked. Acting like what? A person who wanted to keep money he earned. Apparently that was outrageous. What happened to all the money I gave you before? I asked. Bad question. The atmosphere instantly changed. My mother looked offended. My father looked irritated. Madison looked angry, because for the first time I wasn't playing my assigned role. The role of silent provider, the role of human ATM, the role of family bank account. That was different, Madison snapped. How it just was. A solid argument. I nodded slowly. So where did it go? She refused to answer. That told me everything. My father finally slammed his hand on the table. Enough. I looked at him. If your sister needs help, you help her. There it was, not a request, not even a discussion, an order. As if my income belonged to the family, as if my savings required family approval, as if I existed solely to finance Madison's lifestyle. For the first time in my life, I pushed back. No. My father actually looked stunned, like nobody had ever disagreed with him before. Excuse me? I said no. My mother's eyes immediately filled with tears. That was her favorite weapon. Whenever logic failed, emotions arrived. We didn't raise you to be selfish. That word again, selfish. The family had taken tens of thousands from me over the years, but somehow I was selfish. I laughed, a genuine laugh, because the absurdity finally hit me, and they hated that laugh. You think this is funny? Madison asked. No, then why are you laughing? Because I just realized something. What? I looked at all three of them, my parents, my sister, the people I had spent years sacrificing for, the people I thought loved me, the people who only seemed to call when they needed something. I don't think any of you see me as a person. Nobody spoke. You see me as a resource. That landed harder than I expected, because deep down, they knew it was true. Madison stood up first. Fine. Her voice was cold. If that's how you feel, it is. Then don't expect me to ask you for anything ever again. I remember thinking that sounded wonderful. Unfortunately, she wasn't finished. Neither was the rest of my family, because over the next few weeks, they would launch a campaign to punish me for daring to say no. They thought guilt would bring me back into line. They thought pressure would force me to surrender. They thought they could break me. Instead, they accidentally pushed me toward the truth. And once I learned that truth, every single one of their lives would change forever. For the first few days after that dinner, things were quiet. Too quiet. I should have known it wouldn't last. People who spend years getting everything they want don't suddenly accept disappointment with grace. Especially not people like Madison. The first attack came through social media. I woke up one Saturday morning to several messages from friends asking if everything was okay between me and my family. That immediately raised red flags. I opened Facebook, and there it was. A long, emotional post from Madison. She never mentioned my name directly, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The post was filled with phrases like, It's heartbreaking when the people you sacrifice for abandon you when you need them most. Money changes people. Success can make some people forget where they came from. Some family members only care about themselves. Thousands of people post vague nonsense online every day. The problem was that my mother immediately commented underneath, "You have such a beautiful heart, sweetheart. Some people don't appreciate everything you've been through." Then my father joined in. "Stay strong. Your real family loves you." Real family. I stared at my phone for nearly a minute, because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was reading. I had spent 15 years helping these people, and now I wasn't real family because I refused one request. That was all it took. One boundary, one refusal, one moment of self-respect. Suddenly I was the villain. The messages continued throughout the week. Extended relatives started calling. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in months informed me that I should be ashamed of myself. A cousin told me family should always support each other. An uncle suggested I had become arrogant. The fascinating part? Not a single person asked for my side of the story, not one, because my family had already written the narrative. Madison was struggling, I was successful. Therefore, I was obligated to rescue her. End of discussion. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not because they were criticizing me, but because I finally noticed something I had ignored for years. Nobody ever expected Madison to help anyone else. Nobody expected her to be responsible. Nobody expected her to repay debts. Nobody expected her to sacrifice. The expectations only flowed in one direction, toward me. I was expected to work, expected to provide, expected to solve problems, expected to absorb everyone's mistakes. And the moment I stopped, everyone lost their minds. A few days later, my mother called. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hello," she immediately started crying. No greeting, no small talk, straight to tears. "Ethan, I don't understand why you're doing this." Doing what? Existing, breathing, refusing to hand over $40,000. What exactly am I doing? "You've broken your sister's heart." I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. Madison wasn't heartbroken. Madison was angry that her unlimited funding source had finally established a limit. Those are very different things. "Mom, she's 31 years old. So maybe it's time she solves her own problems." The crying stopped instantly. Interesting, almost like the tears had been strategic. "You're being cruel." There it was again, cruel, selfish, heartless. The family vocabulary had become very predictable. I asked a question, one simple question. "How much money have you and Dad given her for this boutique?" Silence. Then a hesitant answer. "We don't have that kind of money." Exactly. They didn't have $40,000, but they were perfectly comfortable volunteering mine. That realization hit harder than anything else. They weren't willing to sacrifice their own financial security, only mine. After that conversation, I started looking through old financial records. At first, I was just curious. Then I became horrified. Over 15 years, I had given Madison approximately $187,000. $187,000. The number actually made me sick. I stared at the spreadsheet for almost an hour. A house down payment, years of retirement contributions, investment opportunities, financial freedom. Gone. And not a single dollar had ever been repaid. Not one. That night I sat alone in my apartment thinking about every sacrifice I had made. Every overtime shift. Every skipped vacation. Every stressful project. Every sleepless night. All while my sister spent money she hadn't earned, and my family treated it as normal. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel angry. Not guilty, not responsible. Angry, because I finally understood something important. They weren't taking advantage of me because they needed help. They were taking advantage of me because I allowed it. That realization changed everything. The next morning, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. I stopped answering family calls. I stopped responding to guilt-filled messages. I stopped defending myself. I stopped explaining. I simply disappeared. And that's when the situation escalated from manipulation to outright revenge. Because if there was one thing my family couldn't tolerate, it was losing control. And when they realized guilt wasn't working anymore, they moved on to something far worse. Something that would permanently destroy whatever relationship we had left. Something they never imagined would backfire spectacularly. Because while they were busy trying to ruin my reputation, they accidentally handed me the evidence that would ruin theirs. Cutting off contact felt strange at first. For 15 years, my life had revolved around my family's emergencies. Every phone call had been a crisis. Every text message had been a request. Every family gathering had somehow ended with me solving someone else's problem. The silence should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt peaceful. For the first time in years, my paycheck stayed in my account. For the first time in years, I wasn't being pressured into fixing problems I didn't create. For the first time in years, I felt free. Unfortunately, my family wasn't interested in letting me enjoy that freedom. About 3 weeks into my self-imposed distance, I received a phone call from my cousin Rachel. Rachel was one of the few relatives I actually trusted. Unlike the rest of the family, she had always been honest. "Ethan," she said immediately, "I think you need to know what's being said about you." I already had a bad feeling. "What now?" There was a pause, then she sighed. "It's getting ugly." Apparently, ugly was an understatement. Over the previous few weeks, my parents and Madison had been telling anyone willing to listen that I had abandoned the family. They claimed I had become obsessed with money. They claimed I looked down on everyone. They claimed I thought I was better than them, and somehow, according to Madison, I had refused to help her because I was jealous of her success. That one actually made me laugh. Success. The boutique didn't even exist. Yet somehow I was jealous of it. Rachel wasn't laughing. "Ethan, they're serious." "I know. No, you don't understand." My stomach tightened. "What?" Rachel hesitated, then she dropped the bomb. "They've been telling people that you owe Madison money." I nearly dropped my phone. "What? That's the story now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. According to their new version of reality, Madison had spent years helping me financially, and now I was refusing to repay her. The lie was so absurd it almost sounded funny. Almost. Until I realized people were actually believing it. Because why wouldn't they? Most people only heard one side. Most people assumed family members wouldn't invent stories like that. Most people had never met someone as entitled as Madison. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Then something occurred to me. If they were willing to lie about that, what else were they lying about? That question refused to leave my mind. And a few days later, I accidentally found the answer. It happened because of my father. He left me a voicemail. Normally, I ignored them. This time, I listened. Most of it was the usual guilt trip nonsense, but near the end, he said something strange. "After everything we've invested in you, this is how you repay us." Invested in me. The phrase stuck in my head because it didn't make sense. My parents hadn't paid for my college. I had. They hadn't helped with my first apartment. I had. They hadn't funded my career. I had. So what exactly had they invested? The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became. A week later, I got my answer, and it came from the most unexpected source imaginable. My grandmother. She was 82 years old and had always been blunt. Unlike most of the family, she had never played favorites. One afternoon, she called and asked me to visit. When I arrived, she looked furious. Not sad, not disappointed, furious. "Sit down." That was never a good sign. I sat. She immediately started talking. "I just had lunch with your mother." "Oh, and?" My grandmother's eyes narrowed. "She's out of her mind." I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. Apparently, my mother had spent the entire lunch complaining about me. About my selfishness, my greed, my betrayal, the usual script. Then my grandmother mentioned something that stopped me cold. She actually said she regrets putting all those resources into you. I frowned. "What resources?" My grandmother looked confused. "What do you mean? What resources?" Now it was her turn to frown. Then she slowly realized something. "You don't know?" A knot formed in my stomach. "Know what?" The next sentence changed everything. "Your parents used the college fund your grandfather left for both children on Madison years ago." The room went completely silent. I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. "What?" She repeated it, slower. "The money my grandfather had left equally for me and Madison. The money intended to help both grandchildren, the money I never received. The money I paid for myself through student loans and years of work. They had given my entire portion to Madison. Years ago, without telling me. I felt physically sick. My grandmother kept talking, but I barely heard her. Because suddenly dozens of things made sense. Why my parents had always expected me to figure things out alone. Why Madison always seemed to have financial support. Why they acted like I owed her. Why they constantly talked about sacrifices they had made. They weren't talking about sacrifices. They were talking about my inheritance, the inheritance they stole. And that was only the beginning, because once I started digging deeper, I discovered the theft was much larger than anyone imagined. And the people who spent years calling me selfish were about to learn what real consequences looked like. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my grandmother's words again. "Your parents used the college fund your grandfather left for both children on Madison years ago." I kept hoping there had been some misunderstanding, some missing piece of information, some explanation that would make everything make sense. But deep down, I already knew the truth. My parents had stolen from me, not because they were desperate, not because they had no choice, because they believed Madison deserved it more. The next morning, I started making phone calls. The first call was to the attorney who had handled my grandfather's estate years ago. I wasn't even sure he was still practicing. To my surprise, he was, and after verifying my identity, he agreed to meet. 3 days later, I sat across from him in a small office. I expected a short conversation. Instead, I walked out feeling like someone had punched me in the chest, because my grandmother had only told me part of the story. The reality was far worse. According to the estate documents, my grandfather had left substantial educational funds for both grandchildren. Exactly equal amounts. Everything had been clearly documented. Everything had been legally protected. Everything had been intended to be fair, at least until my parents got involved. The attorney carefully explained that because I was still a minor at the time, my parents had temporary authority over the funds. Authority they were supposed to manage responsibly. Authority they had abused. The money allocated to Madison had been spent on Madison. The money allocated to me had also been spent on Madison. Not immediately. Gradually. Over several years. Private schools, cars, vacations, failed business ventures. Shopping sprees, living expenses. The list seemed endless. I felt numb. My entire childhood suddenly looked different. All those years I thought my parents simply favored Madison emotionally. I had been wrong. They favored her financially, too. And not with their money. With mine, I asked the question I was almost afraid to hear answered. How much? The attorney opened a folder. Then he told me a number that made my stomach drop. Nearly $240,000. I couldn't speak. $240,000. Gone. Spent. Disappeared. Given away without my knowledge, without my permission, without a single conversation. And somehow, after stealing nearly $250,000 from me, they still expected me to keep financing Madison as an adult. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. For several minutes I just sat there, trying to process it, trying to understand how parents could do something like that, trying to understand how they could look me in the eye for years while hiding the truth. Then the attorney asked a question. Have you ever requested the financial records? I looked up. What records? His expression immediately changed. That wasn't a good sign, because apparently there were records, detailed records, records my parents had never shown me, records they apparently hoped I would never see. I requested copies immediately. When they arrived a week later, everything became crystal clear. The documents showed years of withdrawals, years of transfers, years of spending, and every single trail led back to Madison. Cars, rent, credit cards, business failures, travel, designer clothing, luxury purchases, one after another. Page after page, year after year, it was like reading the financial history of my own exploitation. The worst part. Several transactions happened during periods when my parents were telling me they couldn't afford to help with my college expenses. I remembered those conversations. I remembered working extra jobs, taking additional shifts, skipping meals to save money, living with roommates I hated because it was cheaper, all while they were quietly funding Madison's lifestyle using money that belonged to me. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not emotionally. Emotionally, I was already past anger, past sadness, past disappointment. This was different. This was clarity, the kind of clarity that arrives when every excuse finally disappears. For years, I had kept giving because I believed my family loved me. I thought they were flawed. I thought they made mistakes. I thought they cared. Now I knew better. They hadn't accidentally taken advantage of me. They had deliberately built an entire family system around exploiting me, and they expected that system to continue forever. I spent the next several days speaking with financial professionals and attorneys, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth. The truth was devastating, but it was also empowering, because facts don't care about manipulation, facts don't care about guilt, facts don't care about emotional blackmail. And the facts were overwhelmingly on my side. Then something unexpected happened. Word started spreading, not my family's version, the real version. Apparently my grandmother was furious enough to start talking. And once she started talking, other relatives started asking questions. Questions my parents couldn't answer. Questions Madison couldn't explain. Questions that made their entire story fall apart. For the first time in years, they weren't controlling the narrative anymore. And they absolutely panicked, because they knew what was coming next. They knew I had the documents. They knew I knew the truth, and most importantly, they knew I was finally done protecting them. The family that spent decades treating me like their personal bank account was about to face something completely unfamiliar: accountability. And it was going to hit them harder than they ever imagined. The first sign of panic came from my mother. After nearly 2 months of treating me like the villain, she suddenly started calling again. Not once, not twice. 23 times in 3 days. Then came the texts. "We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Please call us." Family should work through problems together. The irony was almost funny. For years, whenever I asked questions, I was selfish. Whenever I set boundaries, I was cruel. Whenever I said no, I was heartless. But the moment I discovered the truth, suddenly communication became important. Suddenly family mattered. Suddenly they wanted a conversation. I ignored every message. At first. Then my father showed up at my apartment. The man who had spent months telling relatives I was greedy now stood outside my door looking nervous. I almost didn't let him in. Curiosity won. The moment he sat down, he started talking. No apology, no accountability, just excuses. "You don't understand the full situation." I folded my arms. "Then explain it." He hesitated. Already a bad sign. "Your sister needed help." There it was. The same justification, the same excuse, the same favoritism. Even now, even after everything, he still couldn't admit what they had done. I pulled out a folder. His eyes immediately locked onto it. The financial records. The estate documents, the transaction history, the evidence. His face went pale. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. Then I placed several pages on the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked a simple question. "How much of my inheritance did you give Madison?" His silence answered before he did. "That's what I thought." His shoulders slumped. The confidence disappeared, the authority disappeared, the righteous anger disappeared. For the first time in my life, he looked small. "I was trying to keep the family together." I almost laughed. "By stealing from one child and giving everything to the other." His face tightened. "We always believed you'd be successful." That sentence hit harder than any confession, because it revealed the truth. The real truth. They didn't support Madison because she needed help. They neglected me because they believed I would survive it. They looked at one child and saw potential. They looked at the other and saw responsibility. Then they punished the responsible child for being responsible, and rewarded the irresponsible child for being irresponsible. For decades. I stared at him. "You knew it was wrong." He couldn't answer because he knew. Of course he knew. Anyone would know. A few days later, the family explosion finally happened. My grandmother organized a family gathering. Normally, I would have avoided it. This time I went. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted witnesses. Nearly 20 relatives attended. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had spent months hearing how selfish I supposedly was. People who had been fed lie after lie. Madison arrived looking irritated. My parents looked terrified. My grandmother looked furious. And then everything detonated. The moment someone asked why the family was meeting, my grandmother stood up. Then she told everyone, everything. The inheritance, the college fund, the financial records, the years of favoritism, the money, all of it. The room went silent, completely silent. You could practically feel the shock spreading across the table. Several relatives turned toward my parents. Others stared at Madison. Nobody looked at me, because suddenly I wasn't the villain anymore. Suddenly the story had changed. One uncle actually asked the question everyone was thinking. "Wait, they used Ethan's inheritance." My grandmother nodded. The room erupted. Questions flew everywhere. "Is that true? How much money? Why would you do that? What were you thinking?" For the first time in years, my parents had no answers. No manipulation, no emotional speeches, no guilt trips, just uncomfortable silence. Then Madison made the biggest mistake of her life. She opened her mouth. "If Ethan wasn't so selfish, none of this would have happened." The reaction was immediate. Several relatives physically turned toward her. One cousin actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Even now, even after being exposed, even after the truth came out, she still believed she was the victim. That was the moment everyone finally saw her clearly. Not as misunderstood, not as unlucky, not as struggling, entitled, completely and absolutely entitled. And once people saw it, they couldn't unsee it. By the end of the evening, the family dynamic had completely shifted. The relatives who spent months criticizing me were apologizing. The relatives who defended my parents were distancing themselves. The relatives who supported Madison suddenly became very quiet. But the real karma hadn't even started yet, because exposure was only the first consequence. The financial consequences were coming next. and those consequences would destroy the comfortable life my parents and sister had spent decades building on my sacrifices. The family that treated me like an ATM was about to discover what happens when the machine permanently shuts down. And this time, nobody was coming to save them. If this story ended with my family being exposed, it would have been satisfying. But life had one more lesson waiting for them, a lesson they had spent decades avoiding: consequences. For most of her life, Madison had never truly experienced them. Every bad decision had a safety net. Every failure had a rescue plan. Every disaster had someone else paying the bill, usually me. But after the family meeting, something changed. The safety net disappeared, and without it, her entire life started unraveling. The luxury boutique she had been so desperate to buy never happened. No surprise there. The moment relatives learned the truth, nobody wanted to help finance her opportunity. Not even the people who had spent months criticizing me. Apparently, generosity becomes less appealing when it's your own money on the line. Within weeks, Madison found herself facing a reality she had never experienced before. Bills. Actual bills. The kind that don't disappear because someone else feels guilty. The kind that require personal responsibility. The kind most adults handle every month. She hated it. According to several relatives, she spent weeks calling family members looking for support. The responses weren't what she expected. People who once rushed to help suddenly had questions. Questions like, how much are you contributing? When will you repay it? What's your plan? The same questions I had asked years earlier. The same questions she always avoided. Funny how that works. Meanwhile, my parents faced their own problems. The family reputation they had spent decades protecting evaporated almost overnight. Not because I publicly attacked them. I didn't. I never posted online. Never started arguments. Never tried to embarrass them. The truth handled that by itself. People don't react well when they discover parents stole from one child to fund another, especially when those same parents spend years pretending to be victims. Relatives who once visited regularly started keeping their distance. Family invitations became less frequent. Holiday gatherings became awkward. Conversations became uncomfortable. Trust disappeared. And once trust leaves, it rarely comes back. About 6 months later, my mother called again. This time I answered. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I was curious. She sounded older, tired, defeated. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she said something that reminded me exactly why we were here. We made mistakes. Mistakes, such a small word, such a convenient word. Like they accidentally misplaced my inheritance. Like they accidentally spent decades treating me as a financial resource. Like favoritism had simply happened by accident. I stayed silent. Then she said the words she should have said years earlier. We should have treated you better. For a second, I considered accepting the apology. Then I remembered something important. An apology isn't accountability, and accountability had never happened. They never offered repayment, never accepted responsibility, never acknowledged the full damage. They simply wanted forgiveness because the consequences had become uncomfortable. I wished her well. Then I ended the call. That was the last meaningful conversation we ever had. Some people might think that's sad. Maybe it is. But not every relationship deserves to survive, especially relationships built entirely on exploitation. The most satisfying part happened about a year later. I was having lunch with Rachel when she shared an update. Apparently, Madison had finally found steady employment. A normal job, a regular salary, a standard 40-hour work week. For the first time in her life, she was supporting herself. And according to everyone who knew her, she hated every second of it. I nearly laughed. Not because working is funny, because millions of people do it every day without complaint. The tragedy from Madison's perspective was that nobody was rescuing her anymore. Nobody was paying her bills. Nobody was financing her lifestyle. Nobody was fixing her mistakes. She had become responsible for herself. The horror. Meanwhile, my own life improved dramatically. It's amazing how much money you save when you stop funding another adult's existence. The money that once disappeared into family emergencies stayed in my accounts. My investments grew. My savings grew. My peace of mind grew. I traveled, bought a home, started my own consulting business, built relationships with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I provided, and perhaps most importantly, I stopped feeling guilty. That took the longest. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. For a long time, every success felt selfish, every boundary felt cruel, every refusal felt wrong. Then one day I realized something. Healthy families don't punish boundaries. Healthy families don't treat love like a transaction. Healthy families don't steal from one child to reward another. What I had lost wasn't a healthy family. What I had lost was a system. A system designed to benefit everyone except me. And once I understood that, everything became easier. A few months ago, I heard through relatives that my parents still don't understand why I keep my distance. Part of me finds that amusing. After everything that happened, they still think the problem was money. They still think this started because I refused $40,000. It didn't. The money was never the real issue. The real issue was respect. The real issue was fairness. The real issue was spending decades proving that I mattered only when I was useful. The $40,000 simply exposed the truth. A truth they spent years trying to hide. A truth I spent years trying not to see. And a truth that ultimately set me free. So if there's a lesson in all this, it's simple. The people who love you will respect your boundaries. The people who only love what you provide will call those boundaries selfish. And sometimes the most valuable thing you'll ever learn to say is a single word. The word that destroyed my family's control over me. The word that started their downfall. The word that gave me my life back. No.